Emily was not the kind of girl people noticed. She moved quietly through the large restaurant of the luxury hotel, dressed in her black and white waitress uniform, her hair tied in a neat ponytail, eyes always lowered. She was polite, soft-spoken, and worked hard. Every morning she left her small apartment before sunrise and took 2 buses to reach the hotel. She worked double shifts, cleaned tables, took orders, smiled at rude customers, and always said thank you, even when people ignored her. The restaurant she worked in was famous. Rich businessmen, celebrities, and foreign tourists came here every day. There were crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling, and the plates were so expensive that one broken dish could cost more than her entire week's pay. In one corner of the restaurant stood a beautiful black grand piano, polished and shiny. It looked like it belonged in a royal palace. But no one played it unless there was a special event or a paid pianist. Emily walked past that piano every single day. It never touched it, but her eyes always stopped on it for a few seconds. She couldn't help it. That piano reminded her of another piano, the one she used to play as a child. It was old, small, and didn't even have all its keys working. But it was her world. When Emily was younger, her father used to sit beside her and teach her piano. He was not a music teacher, but he loved classical music and had learned some himself. Emily showed talent very early. She could hear a song once and then play it without reading the notes. Her fingers moved fast and with feeling. Her father used to say, "Emily, you don't just play the piano, you talk to it." She had once dreamed of going to a music school and becoming a concert pianist, but life didn't go as planned. When she was 15, her father died suddenly in an accident. Her mother became sick soon after, and hospital bills began to pile up. Emily dropped out of her music classes. Then she left school and took small jobs to help pay the rent and buy medicine. Her piano was sold to a neighbor to pay electricity bills. Slowly, her dream faded. Now she only played music in her mind. Remembering the feeling of keys under her fingers while washing dishes or wiping tables. At night, after her long shifts, she would sit in her tiny apartment and practice on a broken keyboard someone had thrown out. It only had 48 working keys and a strange buzz in the speakers, but to her it was better than nothing. She played softly so the neighbors wouldn't complain. Those secret hours became her only happiness. At the hotel, no one knew about her past or her talent. To them, she was just the waitress. Most guests didn't even look at her when she brought their food. Some were kind, but many were rude, entitled, or arrogant. Emily never complained. She needed the job. Her mother still couldn't work, and the bills still came every month. One Friday evening, the restaurant was busier than usual. A famous businessman named Mr. Carlyle had booked the best table in the center for a private dinner with investors. Everyone in the hotel knew who he was: rich, powerful, and difficult. He often stayed in the penthouse and treated the staff like servants. That night, he wore a shiny blue suit, a gold watch, and loud cologne. He laughed too loudly and acted like he owned the place. Emily was assigned to serve his table. She kept her head down and did her job silently. She brought the drinks, poured the wine, and took orders without making eye contact. Mr. Carlyle barely looked at her except when snapping his fingers or saying, "Hurry up, girl." During one of her trips back from the kitchen, she hummed a soft melody without thinking, an old classical tune she used to play. It was so soft that she didn't even realize she was doing it out loud. But Mr. Carlyle noticed. He raised an eyebrow and smirked. "Do you think you can sing, waitress?" he asked loudly. His guests laughed, not because it was funny, but because they wanted to impress him. Emily froze, her cheeks turning red. "I'm sorry, sir," she said quickly. One of the women at the table, a younger guest with an expensive dress and a bored expression, leaned back in her chair and said, "Oh, let her sing something. Or play. Isn't there a piano over there?" Mr. Carlyle turned to look at the grand piano in the corner and laughed. "Well, that would be something, wouldn't it? Our waitress giving a private concert." A few other guests chuckled. Some turned to look at Emily with amused expressions. It was a joke to the man-entertaining moment in their expensive dinner. Then Carlyle snapped his fingers again, and said in a louder voice, "All right then, let's have some fun. If you can play anything decent on that piano, I'll give you $1,000 tip." Right now, the room got quieter. Other tables turned to see what was happening. A few people raised their phones, thinking something interesting was about to happen. Emily stood still. Her heart beat faster than ever. She looked at the piano, then at the guests, then at her shaking hands. She didn't know what to say. She could walk away and say no. She could say she didn't know how to play. It wasn't her job, and the offer wasn't serious. They were mocking her, not praising her. But something inside her refused to stay silent this time. She thought of her father, of the songs they played together, of all the years she had hidden her music away like a secret. Slowly, with quiet steps, Emily walked toward the grand piano. The restaurant became completely silent. Forks stopped moving. Even the chef peeked out from the kitchen door. The guests at Mr. Carlyle's table looked. Surprised that she had actually accepted the challenge, Emily sat on the bench and took a deep breath. Her hands hovered over the keys. They felt different from her broken keyboard at home, smoother, colder, heavier. Her fingers trembled slightly. Her chest felt tight. She closed her eyes, and then she began to play. It started with a soft note, gentle and slow. A melody from memory, something classical, but not too common. The notes flowed like a quiet river at first, then slowly grew stronger, fuller. Her fingers moved faster. Her back straightened. Her eyes remained closed, but her face changed. She looked peaceful, focused, alive. No one spoke. The sound filled the large restaurant, wrapping around the chandeliers, bouncing off the marble floor, sinking into every ear. It was a song of pain, but also hope. A story told without words. Emily wasn't just playing the piano. She was pouring her life into it. Mr. Carlyle blinked, looking stunned. The woman beside him slowly lowered her wine glass. A man at a nearby table leaned forward with wide eyes. The bartender stopped wiping glasses. Even the cleaners at the back froze in place. The song grew faster, more emotional. Her fingers danced across the keys, her body swaying slightly. It was as if her soul had taken over her hands. For those few minutes, the entire world disappeared. For her, there were no customers, no restaurant, no pin-only music. And then, the song ended. The final note echoed softly and faded like the last. Light of sunset. The room was so silent that even the smallest sound could be heard. Emily opened her eyes slowly. She looked around, confused. She didn't know if they would laugh or clap or just return to their meals. Then, someone stood up and began to clap. Another person followed, then another. Within seconds, the whole restaurant was on its feet, clapping, cheering, some even shouting bravo. Emily sat frozen on the bench, overwhelmed. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't know how to react. Her hands were still on the keys. Mr. Carlyle stared at her with his mouth slightly open. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then, trying to hide his surprise, he stood up, reached into his coat pocket, and pulled out a thick wallet. He walked toward her and placed a few $100 bills on the piano. "You earned it," he said, trying to sound casual. Emily nodded quietly. She still couldn't find her voice. An elderly woman walked up to her, her eyes shining. "That was Chopin, wasn't it?" she asked softly. "My husband used to play that. You reminded me of him." Emily smiled gently. The applause continued for another minute before people began returning to their tables. But the mood had changed. No one saw Emily as just a waitress anymore. Something had shifted. She stood up slowly and returned to her work, but people smiled at her differently now. Some even called her Miss Emily. Few asked if she had any recordings or if she performed anywhere else. She simply shook her head. That night, after her shift, Emily walked home with a quiet smile on her face. Her feet were tired, but her heart felt light. She entered her small apartment, sat at her broken keyboard, and played the same song again. This time it felt different. Something had begun. And deep down, Emily knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. Emily's hands were still trembling even after she walked away from the piano. The grand applause, the gasps, the unexpected silence, all of it echoed in her ears like waves crashing gently again and again. Her eyes couldn't believe what she had seen. The people who once ignored her, who looked past her like she didn't exist, had now stood up for her. They had clapped, smiled, even cheered. And Mr. Carlyle, the arrogant man who had made the challenge as a joke, had actually paid her. But even more than the money, it was the feeling inside her chest that made her breathe differently. It wasn't pride, and it wasn't even happiness exactly. No. It was something deeper, like her heart had woken up after being asleep for a very long trade. As she walked toward the kitchen to continue her shift, people turned to look at her differently. Some nodded, some smiled kindly. Even the hotel manager stepped out of his office to speak to her. He placed a hand on her shoulder and said softly, "That was something, Emily. That was really something." She gave him a shy smile and replied, "Thank you, sir." Her voice was small, but it carried weight. For the first time in years, she had been heard. Back in the kitchen, the cooks looked at her in surprise. One of the younger waiters, Danny, whispered, "Emily, that was crazy. Where did you learn to play like that?" She gave a quiet laugh, shook her head, and said, "It's a long story." She didn't want to talk too much about it. Not yet. It was still too fresh, too unreal. After her shift ended, she changed clothes and walked home in the dark. The streets were calm, the city lights blinking in the distance. Her steps were slower than usual, not because she was tired, but because she was thinking. Her mind was full of memories, her father playing beside her, her mother listening from the kitchen while folding clothes, the tiny, uneven piano they once had in their living room, and the sound of laughter before life became hard. She reached her apartment, climbed the stairs, and opened the door to her small, warm home. Her mother was sitting on the couch, knitting slowly, her glasses perched low on her nose. "You're late," her mother said, without looking up. "There was something that happened," Emily replied as she placed her bag down. Her mother looked at her daughter's glowing face. "What kind of something?" Emily smiled and sat beside her. "I played the piano. At work." Her mother blinked. "The hotel has a piano?" "Yes, a grand piano." Her mother stared at her in silence, her hands frozen mid-knit. "You haven't played for people in years, Emily." "I know, but someone asked." "And I did. They were all watching, and they clapped, Mom. They really clapped." Tears welled up in her mother's eyes. She reached over and held her daughter's hand. "I always told you you had magic in your fingers." Emily laughed gently and leaned her head on her mother's shoulder. They sat like that for a while, silent, remembering the times before life had grown heavy. The next day at work, something had changed. People who never spoke to her now said hello. Some guests recognized her from the night before and smiled when they saw her. One woman even said, "You made me cry last night." That was the most beautiful piano performance I've heard in years. Emily didn't know how to respond. She just thanked her politely and went back to clearing dishes. It still felt strange to be seen. For years, she had tried to disappear in the background. Now people were looking at her, asking questions, complimenting her. During lunch, the hotel manager called her into his office. She walked in nervously, wondering if she had broken a rule by playing the piano. But instead of scolding her, the manager offered her a seat. "Emily, I've worked here for over 15 years. I've seen all kinds of guests. I've seen celebrities, musicians, even royalty. But what you did last night, I've never seen a reaction like that. You have real talent." She looked down and replied softly, "I just played what I know." "No," he said, "you played with your heart. That's rare." He leaned back in his chair and continued, "There's someone I want you to meet. One of the guests last night was very impressed. Her name is Margaret Bloom. She's staying in one of our suites. She asked if she could speak with you." Emily's eyes widened. "Speak with me? Why?" "You'll see," he said with a smile. "She's not someone you say no to." An hour later, Emily was nervously standing outside a beautiful suite on the 12th floor. She had changed into a clean uniform, brushed her hair, and tried to calm her nerves. She knocked gently. The door opened, and the same elderly woman who had spoken to her the night before stood there. She was dressed simply, but with elegance. Her silver hair was tied back, and her eyes were kind and sharp. "Emily, dear, come in." She stepped inside. The suite was large and filled with sunlight. There was a vase of fresh lilies on the table, and soft music playing in the background. "I'm sure you're wondering why I called you here," Margaret said as she poured tea. "The truth is, I haven't heard piano played like that in a very long time." Emily sat carefully on the edge of the couch. "Thank you. That means a lot. I wasn't always just a guest in hotels," Margaret continued. "I was a music professor for 30 years. I taught at the Royal College of Music. I've trained concert pianists, composers, and even film score writers." Emily's eyes widened again. She felt like a child sitting in front of a queen. "I know talent when I hear it," Margaret said. "But more than that, I know feeling. You played from somewhere deep, and that kind of emotion, this can't be taught. It comes from pain and love." Emily nodded slowly. "I used to play with my father. He passed away years ago." "I could hear that in your music," Margaret said gently. There was a long pause, then she added, "Would you let me mentor you? Just a little. I can help you brush up your technique, prepare you for a recital, maybe even introduce you to some people." Emily's heart skipped a beat. "Me? But I work full-time. Haven't practiced seriously in years. I don't think I'm good enough for that world anymore." Margaret leaned forward. "You're better than most I've seen. You just don't know it yet." That night, Emily walked home with a strange mix of excitement and fear. The idea of returning to piano seriously thrilled her, but it also scared her. What if she wasn't good enough? What if people laughed? What if she failed? Her mother noticed her quietness at dinner. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" Emily explained everything. Margaret Bloom, the offer, the doubts. Her mother took her hands and said softly, "Emily, you've already lost so much. You've given up dreams for me, for this home. Don't give up this chance now. Even if you fail, at least you'll know you tried." The next day, Emily told Margaret yes. They started small. Margaret would come down to the hotel ballroom in the early morning when it was empty. Emily would arrive an hour before her shift, and they would practice on the grand piano. Scales, exercises, classical pieces. Margaret was strict but kind. She pushed Emily hard, but always encouraged her. At first, Emily felt rusty. Her fingers stumbled. She forgot notes. But slowly, day by day, her confidence returned. Her hands remembered. Her ears caught every wrong note and fixed it. She practiced after work too, on her broken keyboard, and sometimes even in her sleep. Weeks passed, and Margaret said, "There's a local arts event next month. I'd like you to perform one piece." Emily froze. "In front of people?" "Yes," Margaret replied. "You're ready?" Emily didn't feel ready. She wanted to run. But something inside her said yes. The night of the event arrived. It was held in a small theater downtown. Not a huge place, but enough to make her palms sweat and her heart raced. As she stood backstage, she heard the announcer call her name. She walked slowly to the stage, her knees shaking. The lights were bright. The piano waited in the center. The audience was full of strangers. She sat down, she closed her eyes, and she played the same way she had that night at the restaurant, the same way she had with her father. With emotion, with heart, with her full soul. When the last note faded, the room was silent. Then came the applause, louder than she ever expected. After the performance, people came to talk to her. One man offered to record her. Another woman invited her to perform at a fundraiser. Scout from a music school gave her a card. Back at home, her mother cried as she watched the video on someone's phone. That night, Emily sat at her broken keyboard and played softly. This time she knew this was no longer just a dream. It was becoming real, and it had all started with one challenge, one joke, one moment of courage. The lights in the small theater were still warm when Emily walked off stage. Her hands were slightly shaking, not because of nervousness anymore, but because of the energy she had felt while playing. Her chest rose and fell slowly. She could still hear the applause in her ears like it was happening again and again. She couldn't believe it, As she stepped down from the wooden stage floor, people began approaching her. Some clapped her on the shoulder, some smiled and said kind words. A young girl with a notebook came to her and said, "I want to learn piano too. You played so beautifully." Emily knelt down and gently said, "You can. You absolutely can." The girl hugged her tightly before running back to her parents. Margaret Bloom was waiting by the side of the curtain. Her proud eyes glistened with tears. "You did it, my dear," she whispered, hugging Emily tightly. "You made them feel something. That's what real music is." Emily didn't know what to say. She had dreamed of moments like this since childhood, but those dreams had been hidden under piles of worries, rent payments, medicine bills, and long work shifts. Now, it was slowly becoming real, and she was struggling to believe it. After the performance, the small reception area filled with voices and footsteps. Guests sipped on drinks, talked about the music, and mingled. Emily stood in the corner, still dressed in her simple black dress, watching everything like a quiet observer. She felt like a child at a grown-up party, not quite sure what to do with all the attention. But then something unexpected happened. A man in a gray suit, around his late 40s, approached her with a small smile. He held out a business card. "Hi," he said politely. "I'm Adam Reynolds. I work with a nonprofit that connects young talent with scholarship programs and music academies." Emily took the card with shaky fingers. "Hello," she replied. "Quietly, I saw your performance tonight. You've got something special," he said. "I'd like to invite you to a scholarship audition next month. It's for a conservatory program that supports students from difficult backgrounds. Room, board, and full tuition. If you're interested, give me a call." Emily stared at the card like it was made of gold. She nodded slowly. "I thank you. I didn't expect this." "You don't need to expect it," he said with a kind smile. "You just need to keep playing." After he left, she turned to Margaret, who had been standing nearby. "Was that real?" Emily asked, half laughing, half crying. "As real as—" "The keys on the piano," Margaret said. That night, when Emily got home, her mother was waiting by the window. As soon as she saw her daughter's face, she knew. Emily ran into her arms like a child and whispered, "I think my life is about to change." The next few days were like a dream. People who had been at the recital began to share short videos online. Someone had posted a clip of her performance on social media with the caption, "This waitress turned pianist brought an entire room to tears." Within hours, the video was shared hundreds of times, then thousands. And then, one morning, Emily woke up and saw that it had been viewed over 3 million times. She couldn't believe it. Her simple, quiet life had suddenly become visible to the whole world. Journalists started calling the hotel asking to speak to her. Small TV channels sent reporters. People wanted to know who was the girl who worked tables by day and played Chopin by night. At the restaurant, everything changed. Guests came in and recognized her. Some asked for photos. Some just wanted to hear her play again. A few even requested songs, though she politely said the piano wasn't part of her work shift. One morning, she came into work and saw something different. Near the front entrance of the restaurant, on the wall beside the piano, someone had placed a framed photo of her at the piano that night. Underneath, a small golden plaque read, "Emily Hart. She played from the heart and reminded us that greatness can come from anywhere." She stood there for a long time, staring at the picture. A few coworkers walked past and smiled at her. Danny, the young waiter, said, "You're famous now, Em. Don't forget us when you're playing in big concert halls." "I could never forget you," she replied softly. But with recognition came challenges too. Some people whispered that she didn't deserve the fame. A few coworkers grew distant. One hostess said, "So what? She played a song. That doesn't make her special." Others rolled their eyes when guests complimented her. Emily didn't respond. She kept her head down and focused on work. She knew jealousy when she saw it, and she didn't let it bother her too much. But at night, she prayed not to lose the kindness in her heart. She didn't want success to change her soon. The day of the scholarship audition arrived. Emily wore the same black dress. Her mother pressed it and kissed her forehead before she left. "No matter what happens," her mother said, "you've already made me proud." She entered the building where the auditions were being held. It was large, cold, and filled with people who looked like they had been training their whole lives. Some carried music sheets, some whispered scales under their breath. They had expensive shoes, perfect posture, and confident eyes. Emily sat in a quiet corner, holding nothing but her hands. She looked around and felt small again. What was she doing here? She had no teacher, no diploma, no fancy training, just practice, pain, and heart. Margaret met her just before her turn. "Don't look at them," she said. "Close your eyes and play like you're home. Play like you always have." When her name was called, Emily walked into the audition room. A panel of judges sat at a long table, faces calm and unreadable. A piano waited in the center of the room. She sat down, took a deep breath, and began. She played a piece she had learned. As a teenager, a piece that reminded her of her father, of snowy nights and quiet dreams. She made one small mistake in the middle, but she kept going. She didn't try to be perfect. She tried to be real. When she finished, the room was silent. The judges looked at her for a moment, then one of them smiled. Another made a few notes on paper. "Thank you, Emily," the lead judge said. "We'll be in touch." She walked out, unsure how to feel. Maybe she had done well. Maybe not, but at least she tried. A week later, she got the letter. She had been accepted. Full scholarship, room, board, lessons, everything. She dropped the letter on the floor, covered her mouth, and screamed. Her mother ran out of the kitchen thinking something bad had happened. "I got in," Emily shouted, tears falling down her cheeks. "I got in, Mom." They hugged each other tightly. Her mother was crying too. "Your father would be so proud," she whispered. From that day on, Emily's life became a blend of study, performance, and growth. She reduced her shifts at the hotel and focused more on music. She made new friends, people who respected her story, her struggle, and her strength. She learned more about music theory, history, and composition, but she never lost her simplicity. She still visited the restaurant sometimes. She still talked to the staff like family. She still helped her mother with groceries. And every night she still played on her old broken keyboard before bed, just to remind herself where it all began. Months later, the hotel organized a special event. They invited her to perform for a private charity dinner. This time, she wasn't the waitress. She was the guest of honor. Mr. Carlyle was there again, in the same blue suit, looking slightly uncomfortable. When she finished her song that night, he stood and clapped. He didn't speak much, but he nodded to her respectfully. She returned the nod. After the event, a new guest came up to her and said, "I heard you were once just a waitress here. Is that true?" Emily smiled. "I'm still me. That hasn't changed." That moment was quiet but powerful. And so Emily's journey continued, not fast, not flashy, but full of honesty and effort. She started receiving more invitations to perform. Local music halls, small concerts, schools. People listened. People cried. People remembered, but no one remembered more than Emily. She remembered the long nights after work, the cold fingers on her cheap keyboard, the teasing words from rich guests, the heavy plates she carried, the sadness she once kept in her heart. And the moment she walked toward that grand piano, shaking, terrified, but brave. The moment her whole life changed in just a few notes. Winter came quietly that year. The days grew shorter, and the nights became colder. But for Emily, life felt warmer than ever before. Her world had changed completely, yet deep inside she still felt like the same girl who once walked through the hotel restaurant unnoticed, carrying plates with her head down. Now she was waking up early to practice piano in a real music room, with walls covered in old posters, shelves full of sheet music, and the soft smell of polished wood. Every day, she walked through the doors of the music conservatory wearing a student badge, carrying a small notebook, and holding a dream she thought she had buried years ago. Her classes were hard. The teachers were strict. Her classmates were talented and confident. Many of them had been studying music since they were children, with private teachers, grand pianos at home, and wealthy families supporting their journey. Emily often felt out of place. Her clothes were simpler. Her lunch was usually just a sandwich, Her fingers sometimes hesitated on keys during fast exercises. When others talked about traveling to Europe for concerts, Emily stayed silent, knowing she still had to work part-time at the hotel to help pay for her mother's needs. But still, she never gave up. She arrived early to the practice room every morning, sometimes even before the cleaning staff. She stayed late when others had gone home. She studied not just the notes, but the feelings behind them. She didn't want to just play the piano, she wanted to speak through it, like she always had. Margaret Bloom continued to guide her, visiting once or twice a week, giving her advice, correcting her technique, and more importantly, encouraging her. "It's not about how fast you play," Margaret would say. "It's about how honest you are when you touch the keys." Emily listened carefully. Every lesson, every word mattered to her. One evening, after a long day of practice and classes, Emily returned home to find her mother feeling unwell. She helped her to bed, made soup, and sat beside her, holding her hand. Her mother smiled weakly and whispered, "I'm proud of you, Emmy. Every time I hear you play, I feel like your father is here with us." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "I wish she could see this." "Yes, does," her mother replied softly. "He always believed in your music, and now the world does too." The next morning, Emily arrived at school and found a notice on the wall outside the director's office. It was a list of students invited to audition for a major city concert that was happening in 3 months. It was an event where music critics, agents, and professionals would attend. Getting a chance to perform there could open doors for any young artist. Emily's name was on the list. She blinked twice, reading it again just to make sure. She had been chosen. Out of hundreds of students, she was one of the few selected. Later that day, the school sent her an official email inviting her to choose a piece for the concert. She had to perform something powerful, something emotional, something that would stay in people's hearts. She didn't hesitate. She chose the same piece she had played that first night in the hotel, the one that had made the room gasp. It was personal, deep, and full of memories. It was her voice. Over the next few weeks, Emily practiced harder than ever. She played the same song over and over again, correcting every small mistake, improving her hand movements, adding more feeling each time. Margaret came often to help her, sitting quietly in the corner, giving small notes and reminders. "Remember, you're telling your story, not just playing notes." Sometimes Emily practiced so much her fingers felt sore, but she didn't stop. She knew this was her chance. Meanwhile, life at the hotel continued. Emily still worked there, part-time, on weekends, and a few evenings. The staff respected her now. Some even looked up to her. Guests sometimes recognized her from the viral video and asked if she was still the piano girl. A few children asked for autographs, and one elderly couple left a note on a napkin saying, "We heard you play. You gave us hope." One evening, while serving tables, she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Oh, well, still working tables, Miss Mozart?" She turned around and saw Mr. Carlyle again, wearing another expensive suit, holding a glass of wine. He looked amused but less arrogant than before. Emily gave a small smile. "Still working? Yes. But now also studying." "I heard you're performing at the city concert," he said. "That's big." She nodded. "It is. I'm grateful." He leaned in slightly and said, "You shocked me that night. I didn't expect real talent to come from someone holding a tray." Emily looked at him calmly and replied, "Talent doesn't wear a uniform." For once, he had no clever response. He just raised his glass and walked away. The night of the big concert finally arrived. Emily stood backstage at the Grand City Hall wearing a dark blue dress, simple but elegant. Her hair was tied back, her fingers gently warming up on a small keyboard as she waited for her turn. Other performers were around her: violinists, cellists, singers, each with their own nerves, their own hopes. She peeked through the curtains and saw the audience. It was a full house. Lights shone across rows of chairs. There were critics from famous music magazines, orchestra directors, and even some familiar faces. Margaret, her mother, and a few co-workers from the hotel sat in the 5th row, smiling. Up at the stage, her name was called. She stepped onto the stage. The hall became quiet. She walked to the piano, sat down, and closed her eyes. She took a deep breath, and then she began. The notes flowed like water, each one falling in just the right place. Her fingers moved with grace and control, but more than that, with feeling. She didn't try to impress anyone. She just told her story through sound, her losses, her late-night dreams, her pain, her quiet strength. The audience didn't move, not a whisper, not a cough, not a sound. It was as if they were holding their breath. When she finished, she let her hands rest gently on her lap. The last note still floated in the air. Then came the applause. Loud, deep, long. People stood. Margaret was clapping with tears in her eyes. Her mother was holding a tissue to her face. Even the critics, known for being cold and quiet, stood with respect. Later, after the concert, several people approached her. A woman from a music label asked for a meeting. A man from a film company asked if she'd like to compose a soundtrack. A famous pianist told her she reminded him of his younger self, but Emily didn't feel proud in a showy way. She felt peaceful, like something that had been broken inside her was finally whole again. She returned home late that night and found her mother waiting on the couch. They hugged for a long time without saying a word. Then Emily walked to her old keyboard, the broken one with missing keys. She sat down and played a soft tune, almost like a lullaby. Her mother listened quietly from the couch and said, "You haven't changed, Emily." She replied, "I don't want to. I just want to keep playing." Over the next few months, things moved fast. Her story was shared on news channels. She gave small interviews, mostly short and humble. She didn't like the spotlight much, but she used it wisely. She was invited to schools to talk to young students about never giving up. She spoke in simple words, telling them how she once had nothing but a dream and a broken keyboard. She started saving money to buy a better piano for their apartment. She also helped pay for better doctors for her mother. One day she received a letter. A wealthy donor had seen her story and offered to fund a small community music program if she was willing to lead it. Emily said yes. She started a weekly class in a nearby center. Children from poor families came to learn piano, guitar, even singing. Some came shy, some wild, but all curious. Emily taught them with patience and love. One day, a little boy asked, "Miss Emily, were you always famous?" She laughed and said, "No, I was a waitress, and before that I was a girl with no piano." "Then how did you get here?" the boy asked. She smiled and replied, "Someone gave me a chance. I was brave enough to take it." As weeks passed, Emily kept performing, kept teaching, and kept walking through the city with her usual quiet steps. She was not the loudest, not the richest, not the most perfect. But when she played the piano, people listened, and they remembered. Months passed, and life slowly found a rhythm again for Emily. But this time, it was a rhythm filled with music, hope, and purpose. She still walked the same streets, still passed by the small coffee shops and old bookstores, but now people sometimes turned to smile at her. Some even greeted her by name. The video of her first performance in the hotel restaurant had spread far and wide. But what truly touched people's hearts wasn't just her talent, it was her story. Her name had become known not because she was famous, but because she was real. She had come from nothing. She had faced struggles that many could understand: poverty, loss, loneliness, dreams that seemed too far away. And yet she didn't give up. One cold morning, while Emily was walking to the community center where she now taught music to underprivileged children, her phone buzzed with an unknown number. She usually didn't answer such calls, but something made her pause and pick it up. A warm voice greeted her. "Is this Miss Emily Carter?" "Yes, this is Emily," she replied, unsure. "I'm calling from the Royal Philharmonic Foundation," the voice said kindly. "We'd like to invite you to be a guest performer at our annual charity concert next month. We've been following your journey. I think your story and music would inspire our audience." Emily stopped in her tracks. She had heard of the Royal Philharmonic events. They were some of the biggest in the country. Only world-class musicians were invited to perform. She could hardly believe what she was hearing. "I would be honored," she said softly. The days that followed were filled with excitement and nerves. Margaret, her mentor, came over to help her prepare for the performance. They sat side by side, in the practice room, listening to each note, perfecting every moment. But Emily didn't just focus on playing the right keys. She thought about who she was playing for. This concert was not about fame or success. It was about giving something back. The foundation raised money to support young musicians who couldn't afford instruments or lessons. Emily knew what that felt like, how it felt to want something so badly and not have the means to reach it. She chose to perform an original composition, a piece she wrote herself, dedicated to every child who had ever dreamed in silence. It was full of soft, aching melodies and strong rising chords. She titled it "Hands That Dream." When the night of the charity concert came, Emily wore a simple black dress. Her hair was pinned back gently. The grand hall was filled with people and elegant clothes owners, celebrities, musicians, and artists. But Emily still walked with her same quiet steps, carrying nothing but a folder of sheet music and a heart full of memories. Before she went on stage, she took a deep breath and remembered her small apartment, her old keyboard with the broken C key, her father's favorite lullaby, and the night the millionaire had told her to give them a good laugh. She smiled softly. That night had changed everything. The lights dimmed. The host of the evening introduced her to the audience. With kind words, sharing a little of her background, there was polite applause as she walked toward the piano, but the room became completely silent as she sat down. She placed her fingers on the keys and began to play. The music filled the air like a story being told without words. Soft beginning. Felt like a whisper, like someone dreaming while the world slept. Then the melody grew richer and deeper, parts that made the heart ache and parts that made it soar. Some in the audience closed their eyes. Others sat completely still, caught in the emotion. When the final note echoed into silence, there was a moment where no one moved, and then the room erupted into applause, full and standing. Emily stood, gave a small bow, and walked off the stage quietly, tears in her eyes. Backstage, a young girl ran up to her, no older than 10, the music notebook in her hand. "Miss Emily," she said, eyes wide, "I want to play like you one day." Emily knelt beside her and smiled. "You can. Just never stop trying." That moment meant more to her than all the applause. After the concert, the director of the foundation invited her to be a mentor in their new national youth program. They wanted her to help find hidden talent kids from poor backgrounds who had the gift of music but no way to show it. Emily agreed without a second thought. This was the purpose she had always been searching for. She had traveled across the country, visiting small towns and big cities. She sat in dusty classrooms, listened to street performers, and heard shy kids play old instruments with passion in their eyes. Some of them reminded her of herself. She helped set up free music classes, donated instruments, and trained teachers. She even recorded a small album with some of the students, giving them their first experience in a studio. The album was called Songs from the Shadows. It wasn't about perfection, it was about giving unheard voices a chance to be heard. Years past, Emily became a name known in both music circles and community work. But she never forgot where she came from. She still lived in the same neighborhood. She still taught her weekly classes at the community center. She still visited her mother every evening and sometimes played her favorite song to help her sleep. One sunny afternoon, Lee received a letter. It was handwritten, something rare these days. She opened it slowly. The letter was from Mr. Carlyle. He wrote, "Dear Emily, I don't know if you remember me clearly, though I doubt you could forget that night in the restaurant. I have watched your journey from afar with growing admiration. That evening, I acted like a man who had everything but truly understood nothing. Your talent, your grace, and your humility have taught me more than you can imagine. I now support music programs in underfunded schools, and that's because of you. Thank you for opening my eyes. Yours sincerely, Henry Carlyle, Emily stared at the letter for a long time. She folded it carefully and placed it inside her music folder. She thought about all the people who had once ignored her, judged her, or laughed at her. Some of them were the very ones who supported her mission, not because she shouted, but because she stayed true. She let her music speak. One evening, a journalist asked her in an interview, "Do you think talent is enough to succeed?" Emily smiled and said, "Talent is the seed, but it needs courage, patience, and kindness to grow. And sometimes, just needs someone to believe in you." The interviewer asked, "What advice would you give to your younger self?" Emily paused, then replied softly, "Don't be ashamed of your silence. One day, that silence will turn into a song that everyone hears." That interview was printed in a major newspaper. Teachers pinned it in classrooms. Mothers read it to their children. Musicians under streetlights folded it into their cases. Emily's story had become more than her own. It was a story of all who were unseen, a story of how one moment, one opportunity, and one act of belief could change everything. On the 10th anniversary of her first performance, the same hotel where it had, All Started invited her to return. They were hosting a small event. They wanted her to be the guest of honor. Emily agreed. She walked into the restaurant, now renovated and glowing. But the piano was still there in the corner, the same one. She placed her fingers gently on it and smiled. A little waitress walked up to her, no older than Emily had been back then. She looked nervous and said, "Miss Emily, would you play something for us tonight?" Emily looked at the girl, saw herself in her wide eyes and hopeful heart. She nodded, and once again, she sat down to play, not as a star, not as a guest, but as a girl who once carried trays and played music in her mind. And just like that first night, when the first note filled the air, the whole room went silent.